Hello, fellow chip stock investors. Wanted to take a few minutes to talk about a stock that I've written about a number of times in recent months. I've started buying a few shares here or there and building up a bigger position, but I wanted to provide a little more nuance to the discussion around this company because I think this one will require a little bit of handholding. That company is Aehr Test Systems, ticker AEHR. So, as we all know, the automotive industry is undergoing massive transformation because of Tesla and this big transition to electric vehicles. Aehr Test Systems is this tiny little company operating kind of behind the scenes, helping enable the EV industry, but you'll hardly ever hear of it, even among investors. What Aehr does is they provide test equipment for silicon carbide wafers and chips. So silicon, as we've talked about on the show before, it's plentiful, it's cheap, it's the base material used for semiconductors and related components, but it's not always up to the task, especially if we're talking about work that involves high voltage, high temperatures. So silicon carbide, which is essentially just silicon with some carbon added to it, it's a more expensive material, but it can undergo much higher voltage, much higher heat, and withstand some of the extra wear and tear that EVs put on their electrical systems. But a key part of the whole semiconductor industry is making sure chips are good, that they're not going to fail, because that can be a huge burden on the end manufacturer of a device. This is especially so in the auto industry, where just a single chip can cause a failure in an otherwise good device or a package that contains lots of different chips in it. This can lead to an expensive repair, and especially like with an electrical vehicle, a chip failure can mean the whole car suddenly stops working, or maybe it no longer accepts a charge. It can be incredibly expensive for the automaker. It can be a potentially very dangerous situation for the owner of the vehicle if they're driving it when this failure occurs. So that's where Aehr comes in. The company has a patented system for silicon carbide burn-in testing, which basically subjects the wafers and silicon carbide devices to high voltage and high temperature, kind of mimicking the wear and tear that a chip would undergo for its first year of life in the vehicle. Bad chips are removed from the batch so that they don't end up getting installed in the car and causing these expensive and dangerous failures. There are some other uses for silicon carbide and burn-in testing as well, such as solar panel inverters, photonics used in data centers and other high-end communications equipment. But for the most part, the driving force here for Aehr has been the EV industry. Let's jump over here to my ticker terminal. We can see the revenue breakdown for Aehr. Things really took off last year. The 12-month period ended in May 2022. Huge, more than 200% jump in revenue to 50.8 million. The company for fiscal 2023 is expecting between $60 and $70 million. I think that's conservative, given some of the commentary management has been making about new chip companies testing out their equipment as they ramp up production of silicon carbide chips to the automakers. But at any rate, 20 to 30% revenue growth is what's being forecast right now at this point in time. And you can see how that's translating to profitability. Operating margins went from negative, deeply negative last year to about 15% last year. Over the last trailing 12-month period, which includes the first quarter of fiscal 2023, it jumped up to 16.6%. This tiny company is turning the corner, going from loss generating to pretty profitable. That's a positive sign. Let's move over here to estimates. This is important, just looking at free cash flow. Again, Aehr Test Systems just now turning the corner, but Analyst estimates think about 11 million in free cash flow generated for this current year. They think that'll jump to 13 million in fiscal 2024. Again, I think these are conservative estimates if Aehr is able to deliver a lot more equipment to some of its partners in the coming couple of years. But at any rate, this is a risk that I think is worth highlighting pretty quick off the bat for this company is valuation. Even using these estimates, the next 2 years, the stock trades for over 50 times expected free cash flow. Nevertheless, there's some good stuff happening here for Aehr Test Systems. So one of their top customers, perhaps accounting for most of their revenue in the last year or so, is a company called ON Semiconductor, ticker symbol ON. We'll talk more about them later on this earnings season. They are aggressively ramping up their silicon carbide production. Indications are that they're hoping to become a second supplier to Tesla and its need for silicon carbide chips. Currently, Tesla gets most of those devices, silicon carbide devices, from ST Microelectronics, ticker symbol STM. Another one we'll talk more about later on. There's another German company called Infineon that deals in silicon carbide. Wolfspeed, formerly the company called Cree, Wolfspeed, ticker symbol Wolf, WOLF, also a top silicon carbide manufacturer. A lot of companies here all ramping up their production of silicon carbide, all for the EV industry in the next few years. Basically, we're going from essentially what has been a one company EV manufacturing industry to nearly all auto manufacturers being an EV maker. Lots of new chip demand is going to come online. And as all these companies ramp up this new material, production of this new material, silicon carbide, Aehr could have a lot of runway for growth here. And that's a positive for a chip equipment maker like Aehr. If companies weren't increasing their capacity, basically chip equipment like this test and burn-in equipment that Aehr makes falls off a cliff. They get the occasional sale when a company needs to replace or update an old piece of machinery, but that's not the case here. Multiple companies ramping up production. Aehr is a growth company. It could see even faster growth of its profits as more of its equipment gets sold in to new fabs and expansions at existing fabs. I believe this has the possibility of being a high growth, small cap business for the next few years. Another reason I like it, here's a look at Aehr's stock chart over the last year. You can see it has outperformed both the S&P 500 and the semiconductor ETF over the last year. This thing is not highly correlated with the market. I like that as a diversifier in my portfolio. But you can also see from this chart, this is an incredibly volatile stock. It is all over the board. Thus, like I said at the outset, I have been nibbling. I have been buying a few shares here or there. I will continue to just nibble. I don't expect this to be a very large, significant part of my portfolio, especially anytime soon, given Aehr is a tiny company. They're essentially a one use case company, as far as I can tell at this point. One that I think can help diversify my portfolio and give it a little extra growth here in the next couple of years. Some things I'll be keeping an eye on. Because this is a small cap company, we can see some very quick spikes in the stock price as larger investors especially buy, and then in turn as they sell, we can see some pretty steep drops in the stock. This is one that I wouldn't be afraid to trim if we saw a big, really quick run up in the price. I would take some profit off the table. Conversely, if the stock price suddenly drops by a lot and the business story itself hasn't changed, that would be a time I would go in and pick up a few more shares. Over the next few years, though, I think Aehr could be a really big story as it helps the semiconductor industry make this transition helps the specifically suppliers of the automakers make this transition to a new material type, silicon carbide, that can hold up better in the high voltage, high temperature application that is needed for electric vehicles. This is one definitely to keep an eye on. Tread carefully with this stock though. It's small, it can be thinly traded. Don't take a big position, if you take one at all, in this company. Okay, so I hope you have found this information helpful in your research on Aehr Test Systems. We'll be talking more about the silicon carbide chip industry here in the coming weeks. I mentioned ON Semiconductor, they report on October 31st. We'll also talk about ST Microelectronics, some of these other companies in this industry that could be customers of Aehr and help drive that company's growth. In the meantime, while we wait for those earnings releases, hit the subscribe button, hit the bell so you never miss a video. I'll see you all again soon.